Hello and welcome everyone. We are going to let the room populate for a moment and then we'll go ahead and get started. But I wanted to ask a little icebreaker question, so feel free to put your answers in the chat and I'll read some of them off. The icebreaker question for today is, where are you joining from? And if you had to, would you fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck? I'll go first. I am joining from Chicago, Illinois. And this is a fun question. I put no thought to this question, but no answer to this question when I created it or when I found it online. But I think I'm going to say 100 duck-sized horses because a horse-sized duck sounds absolutely terrifying. We've got our speaker Steve here with us, so if you want to come on and answer that question as well.
Thanks, Rebecca. So Toronto, Canada, beautiful Toronto, Canada. We were just talking a little bit about Toronto and how it's growing and changing and evolving. And I think just the idea of a horse-sized duck, that's a transformation, evolution. I've never even heard of that. So I think I would agree with your answer. I think I would want to go against 100 of them.
Yeah. Let's see. We've got a few answers coming in. Pierre is also from Toronto, Canada. So a fellow Canadian. And Pierre says one horse-sized duck. And then we've got Michelle joining from Chicago, and they would rather fight 100 duck-sized horses. It would just take a little strategy. See? Yeah. Something about like tiny horses running around. I don't know. Like, I guess, but you know, ducks aren't that small. So like, they could be like medium, like, I don't know. It would be kind of like geese, I feel like a stampede just running towards you. But horses are really smart. So I feel like you'd be able to calm them down, maybe.
I tell you, what would terrify me more is if it was a swan. Swan they are crazy birds. They're large, crazy birds. And if you get a swan mad, it will attack. Like, they are crazy birds. So I'm glad you didn't say swan. I feel ducks might be a little more friendly.
Yeah, ducks, I feel like they're friendly to humans. I think they're mean to other ducks, right. At least more aggressive. But geese and swans are brutal if you get them like near their nest. I've had geese dive bomb me before. That was a story. Thought it would be fun to take a photo by them, and they were guarding a nest. So it was not fun. But yeah, so keep putting your answers in the chat. I'll repeat it. I also put the question in the chat. If you had to, would you fight 100 duck-sized horses or one horse-sized duck? And you can come on the chat and answer that throughout the session or participate in the chat. But we are going to go ahead and get started with the webinar. Welcome to today's webinar, brought to you by the Schlesinger Group and the American Marketing Association. My name is Rebecca Ackerman, and I'm the webcast production coordinator here at the AMA. I wanted to point out that there's a Q&A button on the right side of the page. So add any questions you may have, and we'll go through them during the live Q&A at the end. You can also, like I said, use the chat box to network with other attendees and participate there too throughout the session. As a reminder, this session will be recorded and available for on-demand viewing right here on this platform. You'll be receiving an email within 24 hours with the link to access the recording of this content, but the link will redirect you back to this page. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce you to today's speaker, Steve Mast, EVP Platform at the Schlesinger Group, and he's here to discuss the rise of research technology. So with that, I'll hand it over to Steve.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Rebecca and I was also before this, we were talking about we weren't talking about ducks, but we were actually talking about spiders and snakes and some of the stories in the past as well we had for that. So brought up a bunch of childhood memories that I think I want to forget about. But thanks, Rebecca. Just a little bit in terms of sort of way of introduction, a little housekeeping. Yeah, that is actually me. During COVID in the many different phases that I sort of took on. So I took the chance to grow a beard and change my glasses a couple of times. I wore a hat a whole bunch of times. Safely to say, my wife asked me to remove the beard, and the beard is gone since then. But I have been switching between sort of glasses. But it's interesting, the transformation that we sort of all have gone through over the last couple of years. So, which I'm going to talk about that quite a bit as a theme as we go through this presentation. But I do have a lot of different hats that I wear. So I am the chair of the board for the Canadian Marketing Association, which I've had the pleasure of doing that for the last couple of years. I've actually been on the board for over 8 years now. Very excited about the things that we're doing up here in Canada. I also am a partner at a company called Delvinia. I'm President Chief Innovation Officer. And back last November, we actually sold two of our businesses that were under Delvinia to the Schlesinger Group. And I have moved over to them, and now I work on their platform business, which is really a lot about integrating a lot of research technologies into their business. Just real quick, a little bit about Schlesinger Group. Pretty fascinating company, got a huge, long history, operates in 30 locations around the world, 30 plus locations around the world. It's been around for 50 plus years, 1,500 employees. Does about 35,000 market research projects a year. It has a combination of sort of qualitative, which does a lot of things like traditional focus groups, and a lot of quantitative, things like online surveys. But the really interesting thing is their growth in research technology. They've been acquiring companies, much like the companies they acquired, which I'll talk about a little bit later, from my company. And they keep adding new capabilities and services over the years. Work with lots of different brands and organizations. In fact, they service over 1,000 different companies, brands, and agencies right across the world. Okay, so now enough of the housekeeping. Let's talk a little bit about the presentation today. What I'm going to do is kind of break it up into two parts. I think there does need to be a little bit of level setting before I get into what research technology is and how it's impacting the overall marketing space. I think it's important to kind of revisit a little bit around what's happening in the marketing space. So there's a tremendous amount of transformation going on in the space. Being the chair of the Canadian Marketing Association, obviously we're very close to a lot of the things that are happening within that. And then on the flip side, it's really market research's purpose is really trying to understand the consumer or the customer better and relay that information to marketing. Well, because of this incredible transformations going in the marketing space, market research is really got to find ways to keep up. So I'm going to talk about both of those as we go through the presentation. So the first thing is really related to more the role. A lot gets talked about around the democratization of marketing and really how essentially the role is starting to evolve and change dramatically. And you can see this playing out in the marketplace in many different places. So really this idea that there's many different C-level positions being added to different brands and organizations. Probably in your organization, you're probably seeing this as well. Probably one of the most interesting one is this rise of the chief customer or chief client officer, which is really responsible for kind of working across the organization. So not just with customers, but also working with employees as well, or within HR or talent departments, and really trying to bring that overall experience within the organization together. And really the rise of this is happening for a number of different reasons. One is businesses are just very complex now. As you know, your business has probably got a lot of different facets, and it's difficult to have the CMO who used to be in charge of things like brand and growth and purpose and even the experience. It's hard for them to sort of own all these various different disciplines. If you haven't read his book, but Rajay, who's the CMO of MasterCard, came up with a book called Quantum Marketing. And the basic thesis of the book is, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but it's sort of around the idea that marketers have lost their seat at the table. And I'm not sure I 100% believe that, but I do see where there's a tremendous amount of change going on within the marketing department. And it really comes down to what does marketing really own these days, and what's their responsibility? You know, it's kind of gone are the days of sort of the classic sort of 4 Ps. I would argue they're probably more important than they've ever been, but they are getting moved across the organization in lots of different areas. I do think the number one thing that's really being sort of placed on the marketer is really to know that customer better than anybody else in the organization knows that customer. So there's a lot more emphasis and pressure to be put on them. And also too, with the influx of new technology, new platforms, new media platforms coming on the marketplace, it's really challenging the marketing department. And you think about it in the past where, if one of the various different departments or decision makers or stakeholders in an organization wants to get a message out there, wants to promote a new product or service or capability, they come to the marketing department. There's usually a brief created, an agency might be involved, all sort of those traditional types of things. And then the marketer goes out to the various different audiences and speaks directly to them. Well, the last sort of 10, probably 20 years, we've seen this huge influx of platforms. And some of these platforms are, things like HubSpot and Salesforce that allow the rest of the organization to very quickly activate various different targeted programs. And then we have media platforms or digital media platforms or social media platforms that are rising as well, where pretty well anybody can log into Google or Facebook and they can launch an ad program very quickly to a very targeted audience. So you're seeing all these fractured groups within an organization that are starting to use these platforms. Doesn't mean they're using them well, but they're using these platforms in different ways. So this idea of the sort of the rise of these different platforms. So I come back to that question. It's what does the marketer really ultimately have to own in terms of their responsibility? Which kind of brings me to this ever-changing, shifting customer mindset. If we just look at the last couple of years as it relates to COVID, but if I kind of back up a little bit and I look at just the last decade or last sort of 12 years, wasn't that long ago that Instagram hit the marketplace. It was actually 2010 that it went live. And really, there was lots of other social media platforms at the time. Facebook was already around. There was other ones as well, YouTube, et cetera. But the interesting thing about Instagram was the ability now to share images and video, for that matter, do it at scale, and do it from the palm of your hand. So there's been lots of people have documented sort of the rise of mobile and social and things like that. But Instagram really unlocked this entire paradigm shift where now the consumer could not only share images, share their experiences, sort of in real time, in the moment, right from the palm of their hand. There's also been massive cultural shifts as well. So, the middle of the decade, we saw the Me Too movement. So the Me Too movement, obviously rooted out, these predators and these individuals that in the past were sort of, needed somebody to have a voice and really, really call them out. What that's really done, though, from a culture and society perspective, it's really given other groups permission to start to have a voice and have a much larger voice. And now organizations and brands are having to be much more mindful of what their messaging is and how they're speaking to their customers and their consumers. They have to be much more sensitive to the information or the marketing material that they're putting out in the marketplace. And then obviously COVID, which I just sort of spoke about, where there's been lots of documentation around sort of the effects of COVID. E-commerce sort of sped up by sort of 5 to 7 years. Organizations have gone through massive digital transformation due to that, just the rise of Zoom and all the other various different video platforms as well. There's been a huge cultural shift in technology and embracing technology in ways that we wouldn't have never had without COVID. So as much as COVID was was a terrible, terrible thing, it did sort of speed things up. And we have to start to take into account from a marketing perspective, how this is really affecting our businesses and really affecting us going forward. And the funny thing is, even though COVID sort of kind of lit a match on this already sort of maybe through gasoline, probably a better way to describe it, on the fire that was already burning, this transformation has been going on really for decades, right? If you think back to, it used to be the voice of the madman, where you had really the ad agencies and the brands really were the ones that were speaking directly to the customer and telling the customer or the consumer what they liked and didn't like. And so we fast forward, and really with the rise of things like Instagram and other sort of social media platforms, this voice of the consumer now is the one that's completely in charge. And the marketplace is literally littered with examples of marketing programs that may not be paying really close attention to cultural shifts or nuances or things going on in the marketplace that are really going to affect their overall programs. And I mean, there's lots that I could, I guess, pick on. But really, when you look at, for example, Peloton, this is an ad that was back in 2019. It was well documented. There was lots talked about it, but Peloton released their holiday ad, and very quickly, within about 24 hours, they started seeing a huge rise in social media, in this case, Twitter, where people were really anti the actual advertising. And the effects it had on the business was pretty profound. So within about 3 days, the stock price fell about 10%, and that took $1 billion out of the market capitalization. Now, I know since, Peloton was sort of the darling of COVID, it's since gone through a lot of challenges over the last sort of 6 months with lots of different changes going on. But that being said, like, this was an ad campaign you would kind of think was, if you watch the ad campaign, it was pretty basic. And then there was kind of a famous where Ryan Reynolds actually took it and actually used the woman you see in the actual picture here, used her to star in his ad for his gin company. So it was really quite profound how very quickly something like what looks like a really thought through and well thought through marketing campaign can have such pushback by customers and consumers nowadays. And really, that's putting huge amounts of pressure now on research teams. So now you see this influx, at least we're seeing this with lots of our clients, where you have now business decision makers from all across the organizations are saying, like, I don't want to make the same mistake. I don't want to cost us $1 billion in market capitalization or affect the brand. So they're now coming to the research teams in droves, really, or they're looking for their own ways to go out and speak to their customers and get this ongoing feedback. Well, what's really happening here is you're creating this giant log jam where the research departments just can't keep up with the demand of requests that are happening now in the marketplace. Typically, the research team would, same thing as the marketing team would do, they would take a request and they would move that over to create a brief and move that over to their agency, or maybe they had some various different tools that they might use to do some surveying, or maybe they would run their own sort of tests themselves, but they just can't keep up with the demand anymore for it. And now we're seeing various different decision makers are starting to go to some of these research technology tools out there and conducting their own surveys. The problem with that is they might be writing these surveys, or they may be doing their own testing, but they may have some bias with it, because the fact that they're crafting the questions or crafting the research instrument with the predetermined outcome, versus this is what research teams do, is they make sure that predetermined outcome doesn't factor in. They try to equal things. And if someone doesn't like the blue option, they don't like the blue option, versus if you're really pro the blue option, you might write a research survey, for example, that actually gets into to say, hey, you like the blue option. And then the other probably big problem is with, I would say, sort of the research teams themselves is, and part of it is they are looking to transform, they're changing, they're understaffed. There's all kinds of things going on there, but there are a lot of traditional ways that they're doing things. And what's happening is it's just taking up way too much time. Often we'll hear too, it just costs too much money. So those are big factors in it. And then a lot of times where you'll hear the decision makers will say, well, I don't have any control, or I don't have access to that information, or you know what, I don't need a 6-week study. I just need to have some directional insights or directional data that says that, our customers like the blue one better, or they like this feature better than that better, or maybe it's a limited time offer that you're conducting, and I just need to put that limited time offer to a specific audience and just get some feedback 48 hours before we're going to go into this. Make sure that, there's nothing sort of culturally sensitive that's going on with that marketplace, or there's nothing happening that might affect our marketing, right? So sort of the traditional ways of conducting research are just sort of getting old and slow, and it's just taking far too long to be able to do it. So that brings me to kind of the second half of the presentation, which is really about this idea that research really needs to find ways to sort of keep up with these shifting, both internally and how the marketer's role is changing and evolving, but probably more importantly, how the consumer is changing or the customer is changing dramatically, and how do we tap into them and give those data and insight points back to the decision maker in some kind of timely fashion. I think the first thing is really important is we often talk about the fact that research technology actually has more to do with people than it does with the technology. There's still people operating it. We're still going out and conducting research with consumers, with real people. It's not really about replacing the research team. It's far, far from that. In fact, the research team, it's letting them now do sort of more with less. It's doing things like exactly the same thing that marketing platforms are doing, where it's democratizing this and allowing decision makers have access to this. So there's a lot of misconceptions around this idea that technology is really starting to sort of replace market research, and it's not by far. In fact, it's more sort of freeing things and creating, more frictionless environments, making it easier for organizations to really speak with their customers on an ongoing basis. But speaking of the sort of the industry as well, just like the marketing technology space, there has been a huge boom of organizations that sort of fit into this category. And often when I speak to marketing groups, I've spoken to some up here in Canada, I've also spoken to some in other places in the world, and people are often surprised at how large the sort of the research tech space is and how fast it's growing. Most people have heard of organizations like Qualtrics, for example, which famously sold to SAP a number of years ago for $8 billion, was one of the largest sort of tech sales to another organization. They're kind of known as a full stack survey platform, and there's lots of other ones out there. SurveyMonkey is one of the probably more prominent, famous ones as well, that's recently rebranded as Momentive. Again, it's a full stack survey platform, but that's a very narrow view of the various different research technology that's available in the marketplace. In fact, there is everything from video, mobile. We can now do very quick in-home testing using mobile devices, or we can ping people when they're in the aisles of a grocery store or a store and ask them questions about their experience. There's just a plethora of text analysis tools, eye tracking. There's just a plethora of new ways of connecting the consumer to gain some idea of what they're thinking, what they're doing, what they're feeling. This slide's a little bit old, actually. I think it's well over 2,000 companies, I think, are now being mapped out. It's hard to really quantify because the industry is growing exponentially. In fact, research technology in the entire market research space, it's equating for about 30% of the entire market research space now. So it's growing exponentially. Obviously, things like COVID have sped that up as well, but also more what I was talking about around this general increase, this general need for more data, more insights about your consumer. So what's really happening if you think of research tech, and I think a category that's really interesting is around sort of more this agile market research or agile marketing research. And a lot of marketing departments, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later as well, are sort of moving to more of this agile process, right? So, but really what research tech, and this is our Methodify platform that's now part of the Schlesinger group. The really fascinating thing about this is a researcher can set up on one of these research tech platforms a methodology, for example, say something like a concept test on the platform, and then allow non-researchers, decision makers, to be able to go in and use that. So it essentially sets up, predefines the questions, and allows the non-researchers to go in and use that methodology to get to the right answers and data. So it's really connecting consumers, researchers, and non-researchers together. And by the way, at any point in time, a non-researcher can go in and can view the data as the data is being collected from the consumers and see what's happening. By the way, this could be something like I mentioned. You could have someone in a mobile capacity out in the real world, and you're pinging them and asking them questions, or you're asking them to do something or show them something, and it all can kind of collapse into this platform in sort of one central place. Great example of this, and you're probably asking yourself, what is this? We were talking earlier about a duck. It's kind of funny this got brought up. So for those of you who might not know what this is our turducken. So a turducken is a turkey, duck, and a chicken all brought together and cooked together. If you haven't had it, it's actually fantastic. And I think it's a little bit because the duck, because it's so moist, it's greasy, it kind of makes the white meat in both the turkey and the chicken very moist as well. So it's actually quite delicious. Sounds crazy, but it's quite delicious. So maybe back to the duck question, you might have a different perspective about it after seeing this. But this is a great example where RBC Royal Bank, who we've worked with for about 5 years now, in sort of using our research technology, using Methodify, there was a moment where they were bringing together, their advertising agency was coming in and presenting this new idea about bringing together a very complex banking product, a new product they were going to release to market. And it involved 3 different kinds of services in one product. It was somewhat complex to explain. They were also going out to a millennial or a younger audience. And this huge debate raged about the fact that nobody will know what a turducken is. They won't understand it. We should probably go with more of a traditional type approach to this. Like how do we, so 2 hours went by of a debate between senior executives at the bank and their ad agency about this. Now, in that meeting, there was actually one of the folks we work with, one of the marketing people that had access to Methodify, and they quickly crafted a very simple comparison test with a couple of ideas they were looking at. And they were really just trying to get at the fact that people would know what a turducken is versus not knowing what a turducken was. And 70% of the feedback, by the way, during that session, came back and said that they knew exactly what a turducken was. He quickly turned around, presented to the rest of the team. Meeting was adjourned. They went on with the campaign, became award-winning, did quite well in the marketplace. So, and the real outcome of this, which I think is really fantastic, isn't even so much about the fact that they, did a great campaign and, got some awards or whatever from it. Had less to do with that. It was more about how the chief marketing officer in the room really realized the power of gaining quick insights or on-demand insights and bringing that into the boardroom to have that conversation. So, or having that customer, if you will, in the boardroom with them. And there's, famously with Jeff Bezos at Amazon, he used to talk about all the time, he used to leave a chair empty in his boardroom or in any of his meetings, and that chair represented the customer. Well, that's really what I see how platforms like Methodify or research technology in general allow us to do. It allows us to have the voice of the customer present in the boardroom when we're debating these programs or campaigns or new product ideas or whatever, but at speed and at a cost that's affordable. It's expensive to have. If you're trying to have a customer in every single one of your meetings, it's just impossible to do. But imagine if you had mechanisms like this, which are available now, that you could have the voice of the customer in each one of the boardrooms. One of the other clients that we work with as well, it just happens to be another bank, BMO Harris. It's also known as Bank of Montreal in Canada. It's BMO Harris in the Chicago area. This was really a question about scaling. And the CMO was going through a bit of a change within the overall marketing department and structure, and was going to more of a decentralized model. Essentially moving the research function out of a department and moving it across the organization. So individuals would sit in a lot of strategic areas, moving them to more strategic advisors versus being actual researchers. So instead of them conducting research. And they really needed a platform. They needed a technology that would allow them to do these research tasks themselves. So in other words, how do you train a non-researcher, a marketing individual, where it doesn't take up a huge amount of their time, that they could actually conduct research tests or concept tests or whatever it might be at speed and scale with a few clicks of a button. So we came in and worked with their group and really started to devise these, what I call sort of prepackaged methodology. We call these solutions. And these solutions are things like creative territory tests. You can think of all the normal things you would go through a typical marketing cycle. So it could be ideation, it could be territory testing, it could be concept testing, it could be final creative ads, it could be ads that are in market. You go through the entire life cycle. And what we did is we created these prepackaged solutions. And the prepackaged solutions really are a set of questions, right, that are predefined, usually 8 to 10 questions. And then it allows the non-researcher, they don't have to worry about crafting the questions. They're all prepackaged, professionally done by a research professional, set up for you. All you really need to do is go in and configure your test in step 2. So you go in and you select the audience you're looking for. You maybe describe what the test you want to do. You upload the stimulus. It immediately gives you the pricing, the time that's going to be in field. You hit go. So this is the beauty of research technology, is that you can put guardrails around proven research methodologies, but you can make it really easy for someone to select a solution, configure that solution, and then in real time, you can actually see the results. In this case, you can actually see, this is a limited time offer example, but you can see which one is pulling better than others. And if you wanted to, you could dig into a little bit more and understand why it's actually pulling more than another offer. And you may want to tweak that offer and then go back out and do another test very quickly. So that's the beauty of really where research technology can really support the speed and be able to scale an organization. One last story about the Bank of Montreal. One of the things that really excited me was when we started the journey with them a couple of years ago as it related to research technology. They didn't have a decentralized group at the time, but we only had a handful of people working on the platform. And about a month ago, there was 90 people that were trained up on the platform. So that was just super, super exciting to see that they were starting to embrace this ability and really seeing the benefits and the outcomes that they could actually make decisions very, very quickly at speed and cost or affordability. Which brings me to my very last section, which is probably the really most important thing is, really understanding, so great, but what's the benefits of this? Like I can still call up my market research group and I can still get them to conduct it and I don't even have to worry about it. And they come in and they present to me the results. Well, there's really kind of 3 areas here, and it's going to pick up on basically what I just talked about. The first one was really the speed and the cost. I'd like to say speed, cost, and quality, because I think the quality is there as well. So it kind of, you have your cake and eat it too. But We did some comparison tests with sort of a traditional basic concept test. How long would it take? How long is it going to be market? And by the way, the $50,000, sometimes it's $25,000, sometimes it's $75,000. This was just sort of an average medium that we found were the costs. And the other thing is it can be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, often it's 6 weeks to just even do a basic concept test. And the reason why is there's just a lot of steps in the process. There's a lot of people involved in that process. So when we compared that to a basic concept test that we can do on research technology or in an automated fashion, we can get it down to 24, 48, 72 hours, and we can get it at a fraction of the cost. Now, at the same quality. Now, the great thing about this is when you start to think about this, you start to think about this idea of being, well, wait a second, if I can conduct one of these concept tests, maybe I can conduct a concept test, get the results back. Maybe it didn't come back exactly what I thought it was going to be. Maybe the offer wasn't quite right. Maybe it didn't quite resonate with all the audiences or specific the audience I was looking at. Because you have the speed and cost advantage, you can start to iterate. You can start to make changes and retest. Even if you retested it 3 times, you might be at $15,000 or $20,000. You still haven't spent nearly the amount of money that you spent doing the original concept test. And by the way, you did all that within a couple of weeks versus 4 to 6 weeks in time. So speed and cost is a huge advantage of why research technology is sort of growing in demand. I'd say, and I just touched on this a little bit, I think the other big one as well is what I was talking about, putting the customer in the boardroom, the RBC example that I use, this idea of iterative, agile. It's hard to find organizations now that aren't using or deploying some kind of agile process, whether it's in their overall business. But a lot of marketing departments now are really starting to get into these week sprints, 1 week or 2 week sprints, where they're designing, reviewing, refining, and then they're releasing campaigns very quickly into the marketplace. The struggle with that is 2 things. Traditional research, it'd be very difficult for you to try to ask questions to a customer in some kind of formal way in this process without using research technology. And by the way, it doesn't have to be a survey. It also even could be you want to bring people into a user testing, or you want to bring somebody into a qualitative study, like a bulletin board or something like that. And you could actually speak to them and see what they're doing, or show them things in sort of a private room, if you will. All of that can be facilitated now using research technology. But in traditional ways, when you think of agile testing, where is the customer in this process? And that's the beauty, is if you could actually include now the customer in this process. So the M's really represent Methodify in this case, but it could be really any research technology platform that you could actually embed in this process. So you can design something, send it out, get some feedback within 24 hours, refine that, send it back out, refine, and you keep doing this process, and you can do it very, very quickly now and put out in a market with a lot more assurances that you're going to have customer feedback on it versus going into market with something that never had any customers' eyes on it. Last slide kind of encompasses a bunch of things that I've already said, but the idea of improved decision-making, we've seen this time and time and time again. You think of any sort of decision inside of any organization, big or small now, it often goes through 8 to 12 different people before a decision is made. I would argue that the customer should be one of those decision makers through that process. In fact, they should probably be one of the key decision makers in that process. So again, research technology can really embed them in that process. Back to the whole thing of the concern around the research team being replaced by research technology, which again is so far from the truth. It really frees them up so that they can be more strategic in the organization. They can maybe look at, go to the next level with the data, or, there's still lots of large research programs where you need to have a consultancy come in and help you with it. There's lots of that work still being done. But if they're trying to get to these other, for example, concept tests and those kinds of things, which are pretty rudimentary and basic. Let the research technology do that. Let the rest of the team actually be able to conduct that themselves so that the research team can focus more on larger strategic projects. It really frees up their time. And the last thing, I can't stress it enough around, I think that voice of the customer or voice of the consumer should be present in every organization. If we're really trying to become more customer experience oriented, we're customer first oriented, if you will, you can't do that without the customer's voice in the boardroom all the time. And I really do believe that research technology allows you to do that. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I'll open it up for any questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And we will go ahead and jump right into the questions. The first question is, there's so much technology being used that it can feel overwhelming. How can research tech work with our existing MarTech to keep things simple?
Yeah, you know what? That's actually key to this. I think one of the things that's really apparent is if you've got multiple different systems and you have to have multiple different operators and learn these different features and capabilities. So one of the things that we've been working on, and also I think is something the industry as a whole needs to be working on. And when I say industry, I'm talking about the market research industry, is how do you embed our technology into marketing technology? So, great example out there in the marketplace is Adobe, their XD platform, which does a lot of user experience. There's actually in the dropdown now, you can actually do a user testing of your application right inside. So you can go in and say, hey, here's my new mobile design or my new, whatever it might be, my landing page or something like that. And I can quickly go, okay, I want to launch a usertesting.com, go out to some real customers and get some feedback while I remain in the application. So I think the idea of interoperability, and not just data going back and forth, but the actual ability to embed these research technologies into the platforms or these marketing technology platforms is going to be really key to the success of this. And also too, it's like, being a marketer these days, it's completely overwhelming, just the number of marketing technologies. There's 8,000 plus marketing technologies available in the market these days. And it can be completely overwhelming to try to figure out what's that stack look like. So I think the more we embed this and we make it a seamless experience is going to be key to the success.
Great. All right. The next question is, have you heard of / used VoxPopMe, sorry for the mispronunciation there, or other apps for quick surveys of a targeted market? And what is your opinion of using these types of qualitative results?
Yeah. Funny story is VoxPopMe is actually one of our partners that's embedded inside of our Methodify platform. So you can go in and you can actually set up a quantitative, so a simple concept test, for example. And then what we often see is someone wants to add in some qualitative results, so some video results. So maybe you set up your concept test and you want to ask some people, 8 or 10 questions about your concept, but then you want to get some video results. You want to get their actual real faces, real emotions on that. So we've embedded these things together so that it's part quantitative and part qualitative brought together. So the merging of these two things. So it's really what we're seeing that research technology is allowing this blending of sort of research methodologies, if you will, that are being brought together and you're getting completely different results, right? So can you imagine you get some actual statistical data back in your quant study, but then you get these emotional responses from real consumers giving them feedback on your concept, on your idea. So qualitative platforms are just exploding as well from a research technology space as well. So Schlesinger Group has something called QualBoard, which is just an amazing, amazing platform where you can conduct everything from sort of digital focus groups. So you can do them at scale. You can conduct things like you can have like mobile texting back and forth. So it's very much so like kind of like sort of like doing a survey, but doing it in a sort of a text fashion on your phone. But you can share different images back and forth and get some really, really rich and interesting results. So there's just incredible movement in the qualitative space as well.
So, all right, the next question is there a subset of the tech options out there that enable both consumer research and analysis, but also allow for the integration with broader industry trends, competitive analysis, et cetera, to get the bigger picture?
Yeah, great question. The answer is yes and no. So one of the areas that I think is really interesting is the idea of knowledge management. So there's a number of large platforms out there. Bloomfire is one of them out there. We partner with them on different things. So they're more of a consolidator. So you kind of think of SharePoint, but an easier way where you can bring in all kinds of different research together in one place. So think of it as a big home for all kinds of information, right? So that could be a report that's brought in from, say, for example, Gartner or Forrester, like some kind of research, paper that's been created, written, that sits within this, or it could be something like a quantitative survey that you run, 4 times a year on, your consumers or customers' perception, and it all lives in this one place. And then you have a simple way to be able to search and organize that information to sort of draw insights from it. One of the big challenges is, and there is a number of companies out there that are working on this, is that's great, but you still have to dig for it. It's kind of like, think of it as sort of like Google, but for the market research space. But you still have to dig for it. You still have to bring your own insights. You kind of have to have a bit of a researcher's mindset. So the missing piece, which there are companies out there that are working on this, is how do you really draw insights out of it? How do you take all that information together and be able to go, you should go to the Brazilian market with your product and you should make it red because that's going to actually drive these kinds of business results, right? So that's not there yet. That's, you can have one place where it's all sort of brought together, but having the ability where it can actually tell you what to do and help you make real business decisions, we're still a little bit ways away from that.
Awesome. So much more to come, and that should be an interesting development on that end as well. Our next question is, how can we guarantee who our audiences are and their quality when using research technology?
Yeah, it's another great question. Very, very common one. So one of the things I think people have to be really cautious about, really 2 things when sort of deploying research technology. I'll get to the audience one in a second, but the first one is not everybody knows how to ask questions. I mentioned this during the presentation, and we've had instances where we've had non-researchers come in and use our platforms and tools, and quite frankly, ask really bad questions. And what I mean by bad questions, they might be well-worded, grammar, all those kinds of things, but the really bad questions are, they might be leading, right? And that's a huge challenge in this space, is if you give all the tools out, how do you provide guardrails around it where you could have a non-researcher ask questions to get non-biased data back? So the first part of it is we need to make sure that when you're deploying some of these research technology platforms or tools or products, that there are some guardrails set around, especially if you go to non-researchers, right? Researchers, they know how to ask the questions, they're non-biased, those kinds of things. The second part of it is, with a lot of these technologies, a lot of them aren't necessarily connected to, and I shouldn't say not connected to, but they don't have necessarily their own audiences connected. Now, there are lots and lots of organizations out there that have large panels, sample groups that are directly connected. Some are focused specifically in that space. Schlesinger Group, we have over 5 million consumers in our database. We also have specific health professionals as well, B2B. The list kind of goes on and on and on. And these are well curated panels or sample groups that we know exactly who these people are. That's really key. So I think anybody that's going into saying, like, one part of it is having a research technology that has some guardrails built around it, or you have a researcher that knows how to operate those things. The other one is looking at an organization that has a well-formed audience, if you will, or consumer panel that is well-defined, and they can actually prove that these people are who they are, and they're doing the proper rigor around it as well to make sure that these people are who they say they are, and they're not just there to basically, get rewarded or whatever.
Awesome. All right. The last question that I see in the Q&A box And if any more come in, then we do still have some time, but this is the last one I see for now is, in your experience, is it best if market research remains owned by the insights team, or can the marketing department be responsible?
Yeah. So this has been a great debate. The original reason we built Methodify, a number of years ago, we sort of refer to it as it was designed by researchers, but it was built for marketers. And, the intent wasn't necessarily to sort of, hey, we're going to give the keys over to the marketing department. Even though in my BMO example, my Bank of Montreal or BMO Harris example, they were actually, the marketing department is the one that's actually using the platform. So the important thing is to remember, whether it's professional researchers or it's non-professional researchers, is, the researchers are looking for the tools, right? So they're looking for, they know how to run these instruments. They know how to write the questions. They know how to ask the right questions, whether it's a quantitative or qualitative way. So they know how to operate these things. The non-researchers, they're really just looking for their answers. They're not looking for to ask the questions. They're really looking for to just ask the questions. They're looking for solutions. And that's a big distinction when you start looking at and talking with research organizations or research tech organizations, is do they understand this distinction between that? And they can have both sides. They can provide tools, but they need to also provide solutions, especially if they're providing to the non-researchers. So to answer the question, I do believe it can live outside of that. I don't believe all market research practices or methodologies should be run by non-researchers. I think researchers, they do things that non-researchers can't do. That's why they are professional researchers. So, but I do believe research technology can live outside. I do believe it should be embedded into marketing technology, but you do need to build the guardrails around that in order to be able to do that.
Great. All right. Well, it looks like that was the last question. Not to put you on the spot, but is there any last tips, pieces of advice, any wisdom you'd like to impart on our audience?
Yeah, you know what? I think the one thing I didn't talk about here is, we get lots and lots of questions from our clients and different partners as well that we work with. And, the whole idea of research technology can be quite scary. The Terminator picture, and not just so much it's sort of replaced my job, but there was one of our organizations we were starting to work with. They made this comment. They were like, "Oh my gosh, I love this suite of opportunities and what this could do, and I get it. I understand how it can really empower us and bring the customer into the boardroom." All those things I was saying, like, absolutely do that, but you are opening up a Pandora's box inside of our organization. Like, we just don't know how we're going to be able to control this. And so, one of the big things I would say is you really need to work with the organization to go through a bit of an upfront process to understand, like, what's right for you, right? So, are you ready for, to sort of deploy these kinds of things, right? Is the culture of your organization ready to sort of embrace these things? And recognize too, you're going to go through huge cultural change as you get these different people within an organization to be using this. So there's really sort of an upfront process that you really should be thinking about going through. Ours is called a 5-step process that we take a client through to really help them get to there, right? So it doesn't necessarily have to be an all or nothing. I think one of the big things that we've learned is get in there, start working with it, try it, pilot these things, keep it somewhat contained so that you don't open up a Pandora's box. I think that's probably the biggest piece of advice I would give.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Steve, so much for being here and presenting. And thank you all for joining us. As a reminder, this session is available on demand right here on this platform, and a link will be emailed to you all within 24 hours. There's also a survey you can take on the right side of your screen, and we'd really love to hear any and all feedback that you have. Thanks again, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.